Union's 2025 World Tour kicks off as the New York Times ramps up its negative coverage of the performing arts group. The newspaper released its latest articles about the company this week. Joining us now to respond is Ben Maloney, Director of Digital Outreach at Falun Gong Information Center. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, this is just the latest in a string of articles by the New York Times against Shen and, more broadly, people of the faith group Falun Gong. Now, as a practitioner of Falun Gong, what's been your response to this article?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me and kind of platforming this issue. Usually I'm on shows like this to talk about the persecution or as kind of like an expert. And today I think I'm just a guy who practices and maybe can offer some insight, because the latest article really paints people of faith of Falun Gong as mindless zealots who are kind of under this kind of spell of delusion. And I think it's not only bigoted and reductionist, it's demonstrably false. And it stands in stark contrast to my lived experience as a practitioner and the benefits I've gotten, and so many others, especially the millions across China who are being persecuted every day for their faith. And so, I'm not an influencer. I don't have a big following, but I appreciate you platforming this issue so I can come on today to talk about what I do have. And what I do have is I think I have the truth. And if we can get that out, I think that will be quite helpful to people, especially your viewers.
Expanding on that last part, what's been your own story learning about Falun Gong? What has the practice meant to you? What changes did you see in your life after you began practicing?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not something I've, spoken about too publicly, just because usually when I speak about the persecution, I'm trying to kind of help others, and I don't really want to make it about myself, but I do think it's important to talk a bit about the benefits I got. I started practicing close to 20 years ago. I was in college at the time. I was having a lot of problems drinking. I was in a really good college. I had a great upbringing, all these things, but I was just one of those people that had trouble drinking and really wanted to stop, tried a bunch of things. And I was introduced to the meditation. And when I started meditating and learning the practice and the principles of truth, compassion, tolerance, for me personally, it was the first time in my life I really connected with like a way of life and sort of these aspirations and this kind of spiritual toolkit that I could look at myself, I could reflect on myself, I could put others first, and I could really change. And I did change, and I quit drinking, and I doubled my GPA, and been very successful in my career. I'm a husband, I'm a father, and a lot of the good and the bad we have in life, I owe to like my ability to take it and to take the good with the bad is my faith in Falun Gong. And I think that's true for not only millions of Americans who are religious, but also for billions around the world. Like religion plays a huge part in my life. It's not something I talk about every day, but my spirituality plays a big role in my life, and very positive role in my life. And I feel like that's something that should be celebrated. It is our First Amendment for a reason, I think, and this country was founded on religious principles, and having religion and religious beliefs. And if that helps you, I mean, for me, I feel like that should be celebrated. I feel really proud of what it's done for me. And I know millions of people that practice Falun Gong globally have had similar experiences. So I'm just one person.
And given what you just laid out there, especially the positive aspects, why do you think the New York Times would choose to devote extensive, even biased coverage on a New York performing arts company rather than exposing what the Chinese Communist Party's crimes have been against the very people that make up this group?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, and the timing, basically the time and effort involved here, for the 6 or 7 articles they've published and the year plus of research and the time and energy, to me it's really, really odd, and definitely deserves further kind of look. And I can give you a couple examples where I think it's odd, and I've been doing this human rights work on the CCP and their propaganda for a really long time. And the New York Times articles mirror the CCP propaganda in a few ways that I think might be interesting to your viewers. And the first way is that in the early 2000s, to try to turn people against Falun Gong, the Chinese Communist Party started making up things. So they Falun Gong causes deaths. And they would make up a number of deaths, and they were essentially saying, hey, Falun Gong tells people not to seek medical care, and people die, right? Which is false, but that was part of the propaganda they did. And history often doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And what rhymes with that in the New York Times coverage is, in their first article, they used the same idea, which is that, okay, performers of Shen performing arts, because they practice Falun Gong, they don't seek medical attention, therefore they get injured, and there's some bad effect because of their practice. But then after that article came out, there was like so many performers that did media interviews or posted and said, "Hey, I got knee surgery, I got whatever, I got my." So it was false. And I can be really kind of candid with you all and personal about my experience. My daughter's 2 months old, and we recently spent 9 days in the ICU because she had RSV, and she got it from her older brother, and she was having trouble breathing. And the second that my wife and I saw that, we took her to the ER, and she was airlifted. And I'm so grateful for the doctors and nurses that kind of helped her, and she's okay now. But like that's that. So what are you talking about? We don't seek medical care. You're like, they paint a picture like practitioners would, like I would leave my daughter to be harmed because I'm some strange zealot, right? And so I can drive a truck through that, logic just from my experience in the past month. So that's like the first framing, is this kind of like no medical attention. Because if you can get the American public to believe that, then people will be like, oh, those people are kind of fringe or weird, and like that's not good. But that's untrue, right? And the second framing in the most recent article is sort of this idea that there's some money aspect or enriching aspect, especially for the founder of Falun Gong, Mr. Liang Zhi. And that was something that the CCP tried to make up early on too. Oh, that there's some monetary aspect, but that's also something that's demonstrably false, right? Like Mr. Liang Zhi doesn't hold management positions, doesn't take any money from any Gong affiliated companies, makes money from book royalties that are free online. So the whole practice of Falun Gong is free. No one ever pays a penny. It's completely free online. That's what drew me personally to it. Nobody told me to practice or not practice. It was this thing that was like, you can go online, read the books, you can learn the meditation, you can just do it at home. And so, the recent framing around Shen Yun is kind of this idea that, oh, well, Falun Gong practitioners are mindlessly donating resources and their life savings, and they're kind of like under this like hypnosis. But for me personally, like I'm here as a volunteer tonight to try to help, raise awareness of the persecution in China. Why is that weird? I think it's weird if I benefited from this practice and millions of people were getting persecuted and thousands were dying and I didn't say anything. I feel like not volunteering my time, I feel like that would be weird. So they're trying to paint it, the New York Times is trying to paint it like it's weird to volunteer or spend time on Shen Yun performing arts or Falun Gong related activities. I don't quite understand that.
There have now been 7 articles by the New York Times critical of Shen Yun since just August. Now, this does coincide with leaked directives from the highest level of the Chinese Communist Party to eradicate Falun Gong. Now, these articles seem to be playing right into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, turning people against practitioners of Falun Gong and Shen Yun, like you just mentioned. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that's something that deserves a lot more investigation too, because the timing is really odd. Like we have a couple of resources on our website, faluninfo.net, that your viewers might find interesting. And one of them is a timeline. And that timeline starts at this meeting you're talking about, this 2022 meeting of high-level CCP officials, where essentially they're saying, this is from leaked documents and some testimony, they're basically saying, hey, the campaign against Falun Gong in the West is not working. They think about this like warfare. They've devoted a large amount of GDP. It's like state apparatus. They have an extra legal police force called, there's like a Gestapo police force called 610 in China that's just for persecuting Falun Gong and also has overseas connections. So they kind of are putting their attention on the West and including, media and other things. And so if you look at that timeline, you can see all these incidents that seem separate, but are for the same goal. Like for instance, Shen Yun's gotten a bunch of bomb threats recently by like sophisticated actors to try to clear the theaters out. In the past year, there's been arrests and convictions of 2 CCP agents that tried to bribe who they thought was an IRS agent, was actually an FBI agent, to revoke Shen Yun's nonprofit status. So you can see how insidious they're trying to, make their way in there. So as all these things are happening, at the same time, this series of articles that are, over a year in the making, that there's tons of, like kind of resources behind from an institution like the New York Times, all of that stuff comes out at the same time as the Shen Yun tour comes out. And then what it seems like the influence is trying to do is so that people don't feel comfortable going to see Shen Yun or speaking up for Falun Gong, because they feel like, oh, like New York Times said whatever about it. So I don't know, people are busy. They don't have time to research kind of what's going on. And I think that's kind of the effect that the timing is having. So to me, it's odd timing and is doing damage. And definitely the CCP is benefiting from this.
Ben Maloney, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.